Welcome to this lesson. In this lesson, we are going to be learning about constructors in Java. And constructors are a special method that is used to initialize objects. The constructor is always called when an object of a class is created. It can be used to set initial values for object attributes. The constructor name must always match the class name, and it cannot have a return type. For instance, string, void, or int. It does not have a return type. Please note that. Also, note that the constructor is called whenever the object is created. All classes have constructors by default, and if you do not create a class constructor yourself as a programmer, Java is going to create one for you, and this is what we call the default constructor that Java creates for you. However, for default constructors, you are not able to set the initial attributes for the object. Parameters in constructors. Constructors also take parameters which are used to initialize object attributes that you have defined in the class. So let's dive into the code and find out how we can be able to create constructors. So in the previous lesson, we were able to initialize object attributes with the dot accessor method. For instance, car1.name equals the value, car1.enginesize equals some value, car1.color equals some value, car1.weight equals some value. So in this lesson, we're also going to be finding out how we can be able to initialize these values directly using a class constructor. So we are going to be finding that out. So in this way, whenever we created the car1 object here, we called the default constructor in Java, which is created automatically by Java. And as we have said before, it does not allow you to initialize object values. So let's find out how we can be able to write an object constructor. So how we do this is by having a method that has a similar name to the class. So for instance, our class is called car, public car. So whenever we have a method that has the same name as the class, that is called a constructor. So this is the constructor method. This is what we call the constructor. So remember, it does not have a return type. For instance, the constructor cannot have a return type, for instance, void or string or int. So this is how you define a constructor using, for instance, public and the name of the class. And in between these parentheses, you can define the number of parameters that this constructor can take for object initialization. So for us to initialize this, we are going to say we need for the constructor, we are going to take the string name, string engine size, sorry, I think I have a typo, string engine size, another string color, and a double weight. So you can have as many parameters or as many arguments within your constructor, and it does not matter. You can be able to have one or two parameters, or all of them, depending on how you would like to initialize your objects. So for instance, in this case, what we are going to do here is to tell the constructor how to initialize the values that are going to be assigned during object creation. So how do we do this? We use a keyword called this. I'm going to explain how this works. So we're going to have this dot name, for instance. This dot name equals to name. So what happens whenever you use the this syntax is that this refers to the current class or the current object that has been created, and this variable here, the name, refers to the class variable that we have defined here. So note that whenever this dot name, the variable that I have highlighted here, refers to the variable that we have created on line number 11, the one that I have highlighted next, and equals to the name is the value that is going to be supplied during during object creation. So let's proceed. We are going to also have this dot engine size equals to engine size. So what we are simply saying is that the class expects to have an engine size as an attribute, and we are telling the constructor that the engine size is going to be supplied during object creation. We are also going to have a color. What's the color? This dot color equals to color. Again, this dot color represents the main class attribute that we defined earlier and equals to the color after the assignment operator is what is going to be defined by during object creation. So let's have the final one. We have this dot weight. This dot weight equals to weight, the weight that's going to be defined. So this is equivalent to saying something like name equals to Audi, engine size equals to 3000 cc, color equals to red, weight equals to 3000 tons. So we do have our methods. We are not going to be interfering with our methods drive and our methods break, which are the class methods. And if we scroll down, we have the main method where we had defined some object attributes using the dot accessor operator, but this time we want to do it differently. So what we are going to do is that we are going to define our constructor, these values within our constructor, and as you can see, we now have an error, and that is because Java has recognized that we are now not using the default constructor, which expects no parameters, but we are using a different constructor which we have defined for ourselves, which takes some parameters, and hence our IDE tells us that constructor car in class car cannot be applied to given types, and that it requires a string name, a string engine size, a string color, and a double weight, and we have not supplied them. Therefore, that's the reason for the error. So what we need to do, we need to supply these values. So for instance, the engine size is Audi. I mean the name of the car is Audi, and then we have the engine size. That's going to replicate. The color, we have red, and the final parameter, the final argument that we're going to pass is 3000. And as you can see, whenever we pass these values, the error, we now don't have an error, so we can comfortably delete these because they have now been defined within or during object creation. So you see the 4 lines of code that I have highlighted here, they have simply been replaced by what we have written on the line above. So that's how efficient constructors can be, in that, as you can see, if I delete these, our code is still going to run the same way, but with fewer lines of code. So at least you can see how useful constructors can be. So for the second object, still expects a default constructor. However, we now don't have a default constructor, but we have a constructor that expects 4 parameters. So what we are going to do is that we are going to again have the object created and initialize the same attributes. So let's have that done, and then let's so that we can get rid of that error. And the final one is 5000. So we now don't have that error, and we can delete these definitions. So as you can see, by just using a constructor, we have been able to get rid of 8 lines of code, and our code appears more readable and more lean, and does the same thing. So let's run our program and find out whether it gives us the same output as we had in the previous lesson. Of course, we expect the same output, but only that we have done it differently this time. And yes, we do have the same output as we had last time. So our program tells us that Audi car is driving and Audi car is braking. Mercedes-Benz car is driving and Mercedes car Benz is braking. So That's how you define constructors. And just a recap for this lesson, what's a constructor? A constructor is a special method that is used to initialize object attributes. And you can have default constructors, which are created automatically for you by Java, and they do not take any parameters. And if you want to customize your constructor, you have to create one for yourself. And one thing that I would like to mention is that you can have several constructors. For instance, I could have another constructor that takes just one parameter. For instance, I can have public car that for instance does not take any parameters, which this one would be equivalent of the default constructor that Java creates for us. And I can also have another constructor that takes, let's say, 2 parameters or 3 parameters, depending on how I would like to define it. For instance, I can say that this constructor just takes the name of the car. So this can be used to just define the name of the car. So we are going to be finding about the same thing. For instance, we'll be asking yourself the question that we have 3 methods with the same name, and why Java is not giving us an error. This concept is known as method overloading, and we are going to be finding out more about it in later lessons. So thank you very much for staying on course. Key takeaways from this video: what is a constructor? How do you create constructors? Default constructors, and how you can be able to create objects or to supply object attributes within the constructor, and the importance of that. Thank you very much. Stay learning, and see you in the next lesson. Thank you.